Hi, I love property because I know it continues to keep going up and up and up. But no one's got a crystal ball, so I thought I'd devise this chart to show the history of property and how it's moved up and why it's moved up, principally because of two things. Wages keep rising, as you'll see on this chart. Obviously, with more money, people can afford to pay more. And the other thing is, of course, the banana story. Closer into the city, it's in demand, particularly from higher and higher income earners, and those that can't afford it go out to the outlying areas. So the growth of the outlying areas isn't as spectacular over a long period. So what we've got here is, can you afford to retire? What are you doing now to see that you can actually afford to retire and not live on the poverty pension? My old man was a great believer in the pension, couldn't wait to get it. When he did, he was horrified at how little it was and how it decimated his living standards. And the day before pension day, I went around to see him, opened the fridge, and there was just one container of butter in there. Do you want that lifestyle? You've got to start doing something today, otherwise you'll drift through life and then you'll end up with a pound of butter in your fridge. So let's look at history. Back in 1973, this chart shows the wage was $84 a week. Now, the property then was $18,000. And I said to this woman back in 1973, if you buy this property, it will go up at least 4 times in the next 20 years. And she practically exploded and she said, Kevin, how can the average man possibly afford $72,000? Well, then I didn't know how to answer her. Then what I should have said is, in 20 years' time, the average man is not going to be earning $84 a week. But little did I know, with inflation, what was the wage in 20 years' time? It was $571 a week. And the average property hadn't gone up 4 times, as you can see from this chart. The $18,000 went up 8-fold to $141,000. That was pretty high inflation. You can see the food bill was $23 a week. It went up to $140 a week. About 1.5 times the wage back in 1973. That really would have shocked a woman. Rents back then were $17 a week. 20 years later, $135 a week. 8-fold again. So property's gone up 8-fold, rents have gone up 8-fold. The basic living costs were $56 a week then, and 20 years later, they'd risen by 7-fold to $380. So you can see the cost of living was less than the inflation on dwelling. That's why I love property. So that was a pretty high inflation period, as you can see from there. So we arrive at 1993, and then we want to look forward to now. So Christmas 2033, how do wages go? Well, inflation dropped off in this last 20 years, as you can see, and we have wage from $571 up to $13.93. So it went up 2.5 times. The food, $140 a week, went up to $250, so more than 1.5 times, but obviously less than the wage. So despite the beat up in the media about high cost of living, you can see the wage is actually buying you more of the food than it did 20 years ago. The dwellings were 141,000. Now this time they went up by a factor of 4 to 550,000. How did rents go? They went from $135 a week to $519 a week. Again, the factor of 4. The basic living costs, though, despite the wages going up 2.5 times, basic living costs went up twice. So our living standards actually improving. So what about 20 years from now? What I've done here is I've used the same low inflation multipliers to arrive at 2033. So in the last 20 years, for instance, with wages, we said they went up 2.5 times. So I projected that 1393 2.5 times, and you can see at the top there, we're saying in 20 years' time, the average wage will be $3,100. Interesting point with that is, if you look back at 1973 with the average wage $84, that was the sum total of money coming into the household, because it just wasn't a done thing for a wife to work back then. Even if they did, the banks wouldn't take the income into account because it wasn't a long working life. In 20 years' time, it'll just be accepted that there'll be 2 full-time jobs coming into the household, so the household wage will be $6,000 a week. A lot of spending power there with $6,000 a week. I'm sure you'd agree. Now, what about food? Again, we're going to move it up the same low inflation rate, so the food bill will come to $500 a week. The dwelling, now $550,000 as an average, we'll multiply it by 4, the same as in the previous 20 years. That means the average dwelling that you're buying today for $550,000, and it's probably costing you nothing per week, would be worth $2.2 million. Now what a fabulous superannuation scheme that is. There's no sticky fingers in it, there's no boom and bust on the share market. It's good, safe, well located, near city, bricks and mortar. The rents will be coming in, as you can see on this chart, $2,115 per week. So that property not only will be giving you $1.5 million in profit, but it'll be feeding you $2,000 a week. The basic living cost then will be $2,000 a week. So just one property will pay your living costs. Imagine what happened if you had 7 properties. So that's our inflation chart. Can you afford to retire? Look at the prices that we're going to have in 20 years' time, and imagine the pension. And you're only earning probably $1,500 a week on the pension, then the living costs are going to be $2,000. And that's the way the situation is right now. And we know from the figures that 4 out of 5 people who hit 65, retirement age, go on the pension. 20 years ago, they probably thought they had super looking after them and it would look after them. It simply doesn't. It's a con. From the government budget figures, we know that in 20 years' time, the situation isn't going to get any better. Still, 4/5 of the population will arrive at retirement age and be dependent on the pension to get a basic income, hardly subsistence level. And the tragedy is the other 1/5 progressively move from self-funded retirement to the pension as well. So I can't think of anything better than safe bricks and mortar. I love property.